Right, so you know how sometimes you get those papers that are like staring into the sun? Well, that's what this Causal Emergence 2.0 paper felt like at first. Dense. Really dense.
Yeah, I can see why you picked this one for a deep dive. It's a bit of a head scratcher.
It is, but it's also super intriguing. So today, we're going on a mission. We're going to extract the core, the truly groundbreaking stuff about how complex systems work from this paper without getting lost in the weeds. We're going to decode this Causal Emergence 2.0 thing.
Because honestly, it could change how we see, well, almost everything.
Exactly. Like, it's about way more than just this one paper. Okay, so first, let's set the stage. When we say complex systems, what are we even talking about?
Well, think of it this way. Any system with loads of interacting parts operating at different levels. Like, take your phone. You've got the physical hardware, the intricate electronics, then the software code, all those lines of instructions, and finally, the apps you actually use, the interface you interact with.
Right, like each level tells a different part of the story of what your phone is doing.
Precisely. And it's not just tech. Think about a flock of birds. Each individual bird is following probably some pretty simple rules, but put them all together and boom, these incredibly intricate formations in the sky.
Oh, or in science, a biologist might be peering into a microscope at a single cell, while an ecologist is out there studying a whole ecosystem. It's all different scales of the same overall system, right?
Absolutely. And that leads us to this really fundamental question. Does looking at the bigger picture, the flock, the ecosystem, the app, tell us something truly new? Or is it just a blurred out version of all the tiny details, the individual birds, the cells, the lines of code?
Yeah, is the macro level, the big picture, just a convenient summary, or does it actually have its own, like, independent influence on what happens in this system?
That's the central question. And this paper jumps right into that deep end with this idea of causal emergence. It's this mind-bending notion that those big overarching patterns can have real, unique effects. They're not just side effects of the little stuff happening underneath. What's really exciting is that they're actually proposing a way to measure this causal emergence.
Okay, so I'm all about making things concrete. Hit me with a real-world example.
All right, picture a thermostat in a room controlling the temperature. Let's say, theoretically, we could track every single air molecule in that room, every bounce, every collision.
And we could predict what the thermostat would read based on that.
Theoretically, yeah, you'd have this crazy detailed micro-level view. But the paper asks this brilliant question. Does that really explain why the thermostat says, for example, 20 degrees?
I see what you mean. Knowing exactly where each molecule is and how fast it's going. That doesn't feel like the core reason why the thermostat reads 20.
Right. You could have a gazillion different arrangements of those molecules, all resulting in the same room temperature. It's overkill, anyway.
It's like too much information. The simpler explanation, and frankly the one that's actually useful, is just saying, hey, the room is 20 degrees and that's why the thermostat says so.
Exactly. The macrostate, that overall temperature, seems to have a more direct causal role, and that's the intuition driving this whole idea of causal emergence. Now, this isn't completely out of the blue. The paper builds on some earlier work. They call it Causal Emergence 1.0.
Right, I remember you mentioning that. Can you refresh our memory on what that was all about?
So back in 2013 or so, they were using this concept called effective information, or EI, to try and get a grip on causation. They applied it to all sorts of things. Those simple computer programs we talked about, brain scans using fMRI, even how genes interact in networks. The idea was to find the level of description where you saw the strongest causal connections, as measured by this EI, like which way of looking at the system made those cause and effect links the clearest. And if you saw a jump in EI when you looked at a more coarse-grained macro level, they saw that as a sign of causal emergence.
Okay, so it was like they were trying to pinpoint the sweet spot where the causal relationships were most obvious. But the authors of this new paper are saying CE 1.0 wasn't the whole picture, right? What were the big gaps they saw?
Yeah, they pointed out a couple of pretty crucial limitations. First, the whole thing hinged on this concept of effective information, this EI, and that came with some baggage.
Baggage. How so?
Well, one of the big assumptions baked into EI was that all possible interventions, all the ways you could imagine poking the system, were equally likely.
Uh-huh.
And some researchers were like, hold on, is that always realistic? Like, in the real world, some interventions might be way more probable than others. And the authors of this new paper suggest that using EI with this assumption might actually underestimate the amount of causal emergence happening.
Oh, interesting. So the very tool they were using to measure emergence might have been like throwing off the results.
Potentially, yeah. And the second big problem was that CE 1.0 was mostly focused on finding one optimal level of description, the one with the highest EI. But as we were saying earlier with the brain or your phone, many complex systems seem to have multiple levels, all playing important roles, all pushing and pulling on each other.
Right, so it's not just about finding the best level, but about understanding how they all work together.
Precisely. And CE 1.0 wasn't really equipped to handle that. It was more about identifying the one ring to rule them all instead of appreciating the whole symphony of scales.
This is setting the stage perfectly for Causal Emergence 2.0. So how does the new version fix these problems? What's the big paradigm shift?
The core idea in CE 2.0 is that we shouldn't be looking for that single best scale. Instead, it's saying we should look at the entire set of scales that contribute to the system's causal behavior. It's like, imagine you're looking at a complex sculpture.
Oh, I like this.
Yeah, even the most detailed view from one angle won't capture the whole thing. You need multiple perspectives to really grasp how all the parts fit together. So CE 2.0 is about figuring out which of these different perspectives, these different scales, reveal unique causal contributions.
That's a great analogy. So how did it actually do that? What's the foundation it builds on?
CE 2.0 is grounded in what the authors call a more fundamental understanding of causation. They call it axiomatic. It all boils down to two key concepts: sufficiency and necessity.
Sufficiency, necessity. Okay, walk me through this.
So, in simple terms, sufficiency is about how likely a cause C leads to an effect E. Necessity, on the other hand, flips that around. It's about how likely that effect E is to happen without that specific cause C.
So one's about the power of the cause, and the other's about how essential that specific cause is.
You got it. And they go beyond just like hand-wavy concepts. They give you a precise mathematical way to define these things. Sufficiency is written as P, the probability of E happening if C happens. Necessity is a bit more complicated. It's 1 minus the probability of E happening even when C is absent, but other potential causes, let's call them C, are present. So mathematically, it's 1pC.
Okay, I think I'm following the logic there. They also mentioned connecting these ideas to information theory, using concepts like determinism and degeneracy. How do those fit in?
Right, so they bridge these causal primitives with information theory. Determinism basically becomes a measure of how reliable the cause-effect link is. The less noise or randomness, the higher the determinism, which ties back to sufficiency.
Makes sense. And degeneracy.
Degeneracy is connected to necessity. It's all about how many different causes can lead to the same effect. They also talk about specificity, which is just 1 minus degeneracy. So high specificity means that one particular cause is pretty unique in producing a particular effect.
Gotcha. And they make a big deal about how these ideas, sufficiency, necessity, and those information theory counterparts, they're all sensitive to uncertainty, right?
Yes, that's a critical point. There's uncertainty about whether a cause will always lead to the effect. That's the noise part. And then there's uncertainty about whether there might be other hidden causes messing things up. They even use an 8-state system example in their figure 2 to really hammer this home.
Okay, so this sensitivity to uncertainty, why is that so important for understanding why looking at the bigger picture, the macro level, can sometimes be more helpful in terms of causality?
Because when you zoom out and look at those coarser macro levels, you might be averaging out some of that micro level noise and those sneaky common causes. The relationships at the macro level could become more clear-cut, more deterministic, more specific.
So if a coarser scale can reveal stronger causal links, how do we actually measure this macro-scale causation with CE 2.0? How do we know we're actually gaining something by looking at the bigger picture and not just making things fuzzier?
So in CE 2.0, macroscale causation basically means having higher values of those causal primitives, we can just call them CP for short, at a coarser level of description.
CP, got it.
Right. So a higher CP suggests we have a clearer, less uncertain view of those cause and effect relationships at that particular scale. But here's the catch. Simply lumping things together randomly, just any old way of coarse graining the system, doesn't guarantee a gain in CP. You could actually lose valuable causal information if you do it wrong.
It's like not all simplifications are helpful. Some might just obscure what's really going on.
Exactly. So how do we define these different scales, these macro levels, in a way that makes sense, in a way that makes sure we're not just making things up? And how do we know that they actually reflect what's happening at that super detailed micro level?
Right, because the macro level have to be like a legit representation of what's happening underneath, right?
Absolutely. So they formalize these macroscales as ways of grouping those detailed microstates of the system together. It's like instead of tracking each individual bird in a flock, you just look at the overall shape of the flock as it moves. Mathematically, they often represent these different levels as Markov chains. It's a way to describe how the system jumps between states over time. And a key idea here is consistency. A macroscale is considered consistent if its overall behavior accurately reflects what's going on at the micro level.
I'm trying to picture this.
Imagine those random walkers we talked about before. If you have a bunch of random movements at the micro level, the overall pattern at the macro level should match that randomness in a consistent way.
Okay, I think I see. It's like the macro level has to emerge naturally from the micro level, not contradict it.
You got it. And to actually check this consistency, they use a mathematical tool called Kullback-Leibler divergence. It basically measures how different two probability distributions are. So if a proposed macroscale doesn't accurately capture the micro-level dynamics, they can toss it out.
It's like a quality control check for macro scale. So now we have a way to define legitimate macro levels. But how do we track how those causal relationships change as we move from the super detailed micro level up to these coarser macro views?
That's where the idea of a micro-macro path comes in. It's a sequence of these valid coarse grainings, starting with the most detailed description and gradually moving towards simpler, more aggregated views. It's like zooming out step by step.
So each step along this path is like looking at the system through a different lens with a different level of magnification.
Precisely. And they illustrate this with a simple four-state system and then a more complex eight-state example in Figure 3 of the paper. You can see how they group those microstates together into these chunks, these macrostates, as you move along the path.
So causal emergence in CE 2.0 is about what happens to those measures of causation, the CPs, as we move along this path from micro to macro.
You nailed it. Causal emergence is the total gain in those CPs that you rack up as you travel along a valid micropath. At each step, when you go from finer to coarser, you calculate the change in CP, written as SDCP. The total causal emergence is the sum of all those positive changes.
Like climbing a mountain and measuring how much higher you get with each step.
Perfect analogy. Figure 4 in the paper actually shows this for their 8-state example. You see the CP going up as they group certain states together, and then eventually it levels off when grouping things further doesn't add any more clarity to the causal relationships.
So it seems like the choice of this path that we decide to group the microstates, that's a pretty big deal, right?
It is. Sometimes the way the system is structured might give us some natural clues about how to do the coarse graining. Like if we know certain components always work together, we might group them. But they also lay out a more principled approach. Ideally, you want to find the macro level that gives us the biggest bang for your buck, the biggest overall increase in CP. If there are multiple levels that do that, they say go for the one that involves the least amount of simplification. And once you've found that promising endpoint, the best path to study is the longest sequence of consistent macroscales that takes you there, from the micro level all the way up.
It's like finding the most scenic route to the summit.
Exactly. They also mention this idea of diminishing returns. You keep coarse graining until you see meaningful gains in CP, and then you stop when those gains become tiny or even start to reverse.
Okay, so this is giving us a much clearer picture of how and when emergence happens. But the title of the paper mentions emergent complexity too. So how does CE 2.0 move beyond just spotting emergence to actually measuring complexity?
This is where things get really interesting. See, traditional ideas of complexity often center on things like how unpredictable a system is or how much information it holds. But CE 2.0 takes a different angle. It's all about complexity that's causally relevant.
Causal complexity. I like how that sounds.
Right. And they introduced this new concept, emergent complexity, or EC, to measure how those causal influences are spread out across the different levels of the system. Think about it. A simple system might have all its causal power concentrated at one level, either the super detailed micro level or a very crude macro level. But a truly complex system, that's where you see significant causal contributions coming from those in-between levels, the mesoscales.
So it's not just about whether those higher level patterns emerge, but about how the causal work is spread out across those different levels. That's fascinating.
It is, and to measure this, they use the change in CP, ECA-CP, at each step along that micro-macro path as a gauge of how much each scale is contributing. Then, to quantify how spread out those contributions are, they calculate something related to the entropy of all those SOCP values.
Entropy, that's a whole other deep dive.
True. But in simple terms, if all the big jumps in causal clarity are happening at just one or two levels, this measure of emergent complexity is going to be low, suggesting a simpler system. But if those gains are distributed across several intermediate levels, the measure will be higher, hinting at greater emergent complexity. They illustrate this really well in Figure 5 of the paper. They show examples where the causal influence is all top-heavy, concentrated at the top levels, versus systems where it's more centered in those middle meso levels.
It's a really elegant way to think about what actually makes a system complex, causally speaking. Now, the paper makes a strong case that CE 2.0 has some serious advantages over other approaches to understanding emergence, including its own predecessor, CE 1.0. What are the main selling points?
Well, first and foremost, they argue that CE 2.0 is built on a much stronger foundation, what they call that axiomatic foundation, those bedrock ideas of sufficiency and necessity. They claim this makes it way more robust than CE 1.0, which was totally reliant on that one measure, EI, and all its baggage about intervention distributions. The CP gains in CE 2.0, they argue, aren't as sensitive to those specific assumptions, so they give you a more reliable picture of causal influence.
So it's like they've upgraded the measuring stick itself, making it more accurate and reliable.
Precisely. And the second big advantage is that CE 2.0 supposedly captures all instances of macroscale causation, while even CE 1.0 could miss some. They use this example of a block model shown in Figure 6 to illustrate this. In this type of system where you have these distinct clumps of microstates that form clear macrostates, CE 1.0 using EI might not pick up any causal emergence at all. But CE 2.0, looking at the gains in CP, correctly identifies the causal influence at the macro level. They also point out that some math shortcuts used with CE 1.0 can be really wonky in these scenarios.
Like CE 2.0 has better vision, it can see emergent patterns that CE 1.0 might completely overlook.
Exactly. And lastly, they emphasize CE 2.0's ability to really break down the multi-scale causal structure. Instead of just finding the one dominant level, it can reveal how different levels of organization all contribute, each in their own way, to the overall behavior.
It's giving you the whole picture, not just a snapshot.
Right, and this has big implications for some longstanding debates like the one about causal exclusion, which basically says that if there's a cause at the micro level, then a macro level cause might be redundant. CE 2.0 suggests we need a more nuanced view where both macro and micro can be pulling the strings, so to speak, without canceling each other out.
Okay, so we've got this powerful new framework, but the authors are also honest about the fact that there are still challenges ahead, right? They're not claiming to have all the answers.
Absolutely. One of the big practical challenges is what they call the combinatorial explosion. As systems get bigger and more complex, the number of possible ways to define those macroscales, the number of potential micro-macro paths, it just explodes.
Explodes how? Like it takes forever to calculate all the possibilities.
More like it becomes practically impossible. Like even with supercomputers, it could take longer than the lifespan of the universe to analyze them all. So while they think some of the tricks and shortcuts from CE 1.0 might be adaptable to CE 2.0, figuring out how to apply it to these really big, messy, real-world systems, that's a huge hurdle. Another limitation right now is that you usually have to pick one specific micro-macro path to study, though they do hint that future developments might be able to integrate information across all the valid paths.
So more work to be done, but lots of exciting avenues to explore. And they do offer some ideas about how they might tackle these challenges going forward, right?
They do. They specifically mention the work of Zhang and colleagues who've been using this mathematical technique called singular value decomposition, or SVD. Now, SVD had some issues within the old CE 1.0 framework, but they believe that adapting it for CE 2.0 could be a game changer. It could be a way to analyze those huge systems more efficiently without having to explore every single possible path. The idea is that singular values might point us toward the most important directions of coarse graining, the ones that really capture the essential causal relationships across the different scales.
So like a compass pointing you toward the most informative paths to explore.
Precisely.
And the potential applications for all this, they seem almost limitless. We're talking about potentially revolutionizing how we understand everything from brains to economies, right?
Exactly. They specifically mention physics, biology, neuroscience, even economics as fields where this could have a major impact. And what I find particularly intriguing is its potential role in understanding AI, making those complex artificial intelligence systems more transparent, more interpretable, and ultimately safer. By looking at the multi-scale structure of neural networks, those powerful AI systems, CE 2.0, could help us understand why they make the decisions they do.
And that could be key to making sure AI develops in a way that's beneficial, not harmful. So, to bring it all home for you, the listener, CE 2.0 offers a new way to think about how those intricate systems with tons of moving parts actually function. It's not about reducing everything to the tiniest bits, and it's not about picking just one best way to look at things. It's about appreciating the whole interconnected web of scales. And with emergent complexity, we've got this new tool for understanding how those causal influences are spread out within these systems, which could be crucial for understanding how everything works, from our own brains to the global economy.
And while there are definitely still practical challenges to applying it to every system out there, those stronger theoretical foundation, the fact that it seems to capture a more complete picture of multi-scale causation, that makes CE 2.0 a truly significant step forward in how we understand emergence and complexity.
It really does feel like a new chapter is opening. So, As you go about your day, think about a complex system that you encounter, maybe in your work, maybe just something you're fascinated by in the world. Where do you think causal emergence might be playing a hidden role? What kind of layers of organization and causal influence might be lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered? Maybe CE 2.0 can give us the tools to see those systems in a whole new light, to go beyond just the parts or the overall behavior, and really understand how the whole becomes so much greater than the sum of its parts. It definitely gives you something to ponder, wouldn't you say?
It certainly does. The world is full of these hidden layers just waiting to be revealed.